Hi, Samantha is back in some capacity, I guess. I'm here to wrap up some of the books that I've read in the past couple of months, but this section we're going to talk about a little challenge that I gave myself, and that was that I was going to borrow or copy the TBR of a fellow booktuber. I am going to do this again. Just fair the warning, I'm seeking out other people's TBRs. Just scoping it out, maybe do it one more time this year, maybe at the beginning of the year, I don't know. Whatever. I borrowed the TBR of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. I'm going to link down below their original TBR, which was from June the 20th, which is part of why I chose to steal their TBR. And also their wrap up, because they wrapped this up at the beginning of August, and they actually did a comparison with some of the reviews that I left on Goodreads. But anyway, I think that one can compare our reviews and they're going to be quite similar. We are going to start here. This was the most intimidating book, so I started with the most intimidating book. I picked this up on as an audiobook and read along with it, kinda. I would listen to it while I worked, and I actually ended up screen capturing moments that I thought were funny, so I'd try to figure out where it was in the text. Just so you know, I ended up tabbing all of the chapters because they do not align with the audiobook. So I ended up reading a lot of this, unfortunately. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know. It was fine. This is a book about the French Revolution. Oh wait, no. It's about 3 middle-aged Frenchmen sitting in various rooms and bars discussing politics and the invention of the guillotine. But it is graphic and funny, and I really did very much like a lot of the dialogue. This is a lot more historical than fiction, historical fiction. So it was very dry, and it did take me something like 10 days to 2 weeks to get through this. I started this at the end of June and then continued on with it. I think I finished it like the 8th or something like that. Actually, I can tell you exactly. I finished it on the 8th. And it was, so it was exhausting. This is not the easiest book to get through. But I did find it interesting, obviously, because I have all these tabs. And so what I should tell you is that it's more about the characterization of these men that makes the book interesting, and their dialogue, their interactions. There is historical elements that get sewn into it in a way, but it's just kind of thrown in. The book took me by surprise. I gave it 3.5 stars because fine. It very clearly was a lot of research, but there isn't much story to it. So my Dark Vanessa, which is all over BookTube. Yes, I hate this cover too. And what I think that they did as the designers is that they actually went through a bunch of Lolita covers from the past and kind of meshed those in. So yes, the UK version of this cover is a lot nicer, and it seems to match the interior a bit more, I would say. Now, they did just recently post a review of this, which was probably a spoilery review, I'm assuming. I have not watched it yet, but I'll link it down below. And overall, we all liked this book. It was, it's not the easiest of reads, because this is about a 15-year-old girl who is groomed and raped, and she ends up in a really sick relationship with her teacher. And she is giving you the perspective of, from her as a 15-year-old, and then you also get the POV of Vanessa when she is in her, I think she's in her early 30s. And what I found interesting about this book was the authenticity of this voice. And I did end up listening to part of this on audio, and if you go all the way to the end of the book, there is a dialogue between the audiobook narrator and the author, and I forget who reviewed them, but the author, actually, Russell, she talks about how this book was partially written when she was in her teens, when she was in high school. So those parts that come across so authentically were probably genuine words of a teenager. So it's mind-boggling and incredible. The book discusses a lot of the negative issues that came as a result of the Me Too movement, but it also it talks about how difficult and how complex it is to be a survivor of sexual abuse. This is some of the scenes in here are kind of graphic and they're kind of frightening in a way, but it's a really good read. I gave it 4 stars, and I think overall we gave it all like 4 or 5 stars or something like that. It's a very good book. Recommended. Next book that I want to talk about is How We Disappeared by Jinjin Lee. This book is about the Malaysian, when the Japanese invaded Malaysia and its surrounding cities in Singapore, little towns, little villages, and it takes place in the 1940s. It takes place in a later timeline and also in the year 2000 when we encounter a teenager, and his grandmother has suffered a stroke and she wants to relay a message to her son, and she mistakes it for his dad, and she has a secret to tell him, and he recorded it, and he's kind of fighting with the idea of whether or not to tell his dad. He wants to do more research first, and which we also get the perspective of Wan Di, who is a teen girl in the 1940s, and she is living in a small town or village outside of Singapore, and her village is invaded by the Japanese, and you get to experience all of the horror that they witness and have to deal with. And also when they come and collect her and several of the other young women in her village and send them off to brothels, and they are forced into sex slavery. So you gotta read about that. I will tell you, fair warning, many trigger warning, this is not an easy book to consume. It has a lot of sexual abuse, and there's also, oh god, there's more heads on pikes. So reaching back to this lovely book, there's a lot of violence. What I liked about this book was the writing itself, and I liked it kind of gives you some red herrings in a way. The author, Lee, actually mentions that people ask her how the ending, they want to know more about the ending, to which she says that she's left it up to interpretation. And that, I mean, I know that might sound frustrating, but for me, I think it's satisfying. It leaves it open-ended. The next book that I'm going to discuss is actually it's my favorite book from the whole lot of the books that I consumed this month, and that is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evernesta. And this book, it shares the Booker Prize with Margaret Atwood for The Testaments. And I feel that this is definitely the stronger of the two books. I read The Testaments earlier this year, but this is definitely a book that it's so uplifting, and it made me feel so warm, and this is a superior book in many ways. The entire story is the finale is the closing night, not the closing night, it's the after party for that play, and you're meeting all of those characters that are going to be in attendance for the most part. But the book follows each one of these people, and you get their backstory and some sort of a trauma that they had to go through, and then how they come out of it. And it's just so uplifting. And I will warn you that there is a lot of emotional abuse and some sexual abuse, and there's actually like a gang rape scene in here, and but the way it's written is very delicately. I'm gonna try and zoom you in, and you'll notice that there's very little punctuation, and that there's actually an awful lot of prose going on. It's very much like reading a whole poem, but it flows like water. It's just, there's no other way. It really does flow. It's so smooth, and it's just, I love all these people. There is one non-binary character in this book, and they were Megan and they turn into Morgan. And, excuse me, not only is it their understanding of their gender, and it's also about them coming out to their 90-something-year-old grandmother. And that was the most heartwarming story. It supports the back, so oh my god. It's just, this is a great book. So you must read it. I obviously gave this book 5 stars on Goodreads, so pick it up if you haven't already. I'm like pushing this book on everyone right now. On a similar note, Homegoing by Yagazi. This book follows 2 sisters. They're actually half-sisters from Ghana, and one is married off to a white man, and his family is actually responsible for selling slaves to the Americas, and the other sister is one of those unfortunate souls that ends up being sold into slavery and captured and then sold into slavery. And we follow not just these girls as they become women, but we get their mini histories and then their offspring, and we hear what comes of the family line, both in Ghana and in the United States. It's powerful and it's gutting. It's very moving, and I highly recommend it just to really feel. This story actually follows the families as they're going back and forth between the US and Ghana, and we actually follow various characters, and we get a little glimpse of what their life is like and what they're dealing with. And all of the stories are really powerful and moving, but they're also hope-filled, which is just what you're left with in the end. It's actually very moving to see the expanse of this bloodline and what becomes of it. So I definitely recommend this, and I think that they also recommended this highly. 4 stars from me. 4.5 stars? I said 4 stars. Staying in Africa just for another novel, we are going to talk about Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I enjoyed this book. I believe what Scott said was that he found it boring. And I can see that, because the book feels longer than it really needed to be. Because the first half of the book, we're just following characters and we're getting to know them. Literally, like the whole first half of the book, we're just getting to know these people. And I mean, I liked them. I liked their life, but it's essentially like almost in a contemporary format. And then the second half of the book, the war has broken out, and they're basically forced out of their homes. And 2 of the characters actually they were rich, and they had, I don't want to say lavish lifestyles, but they didn't have to worry about anything, but they're basically become refugees, and they've become refugees. And but they're taking everything in stride, and they're not really complaining. But this was a completely new subject for me, and I found it fascinating. I enjoyed this. I thought that it was it was an interesting, it's not a study, but it was an interesting plot, because I've not experienced such a war like this, and I don't know, I really enjoyed it, so I highly recommend it. And I know this is probably I think this is one of her lowest rated books, so I'm definitely gonna be reading more from her. So now on to the picture Dorian Gray, which I was really looking forward to, and inevitably ended up giving it 3 stars because I was bored, and incredibly annoyed, because I don't think that it was the greatest of writing of all time. Was it highly quotable? Yes. Well, I've got 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 quotes. I mean, it's not a short story, but it's a short-ish story. It's only 200 something pages. So yeah, it's very quotable. That's pretty much it. And this is the first book of his that I've actually read. Anyway, they didn't know I had actually read this book, and I didn't enjoy them as much as they did. And this, I think that they actually did a buddy read with this book, and they actually did a discussion. Now, I will tell you, I know that Scott gave this 3 stars previously, which is how I ended up rating this book. It's just about a 20-something-year-old man who is having his portrait painted, and he manages to somehow curse the portrait by saying that he hopes that he never grows old himself, and that all of his agedness and his ugliness, I guess, could just be given to the painting, because he's jealous of the painting in a way. He wants the painting to have to go through what he himself has to go through in like the process of aging. Really, it's that's it. The painting does age, because he ends up going on this, I called it a 7 Deadly Sins tour, which is the only way to really describe it. It's just basically a ton of flowery text about him just being a bad boy, I guess. He's just fooling around with women. I guess he's taking drugs, and he's kicking puppies or something. I have no idea. Oh, Wilde was never specific in the text, and it's just presumed what he does. And I understand why people give it 5 stars. And I know that there's historical matter that he dealt with, especially that he was, not Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde himself was persecuted for homosexuality, and a lot of that comes across in this book. However, I found it to be more anti-gay. I found the book to be more of internalized fear of homosexuality, and that his painter comes out to him and he deals with it in a very non-pleasant way. So no, I don't agree with their assessment of the book, and I mean, I could discuss it further with more people and why they absolutely adore it, but in terms of reading enjoyment, no more than a 3. I actually didn't enjoy reading this at all. It was not exciting. There's literally people reading one another in this text. This is my least favorite book, even over this ginormous bastard. But this is my least favorite book from this month. Lastly, we're going to end on a high note. This is a close second to my favorite books of the entire month, and this was Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. I am going to be diving into more of her text because this was phenomenal. This is about a young black woman living in Los Angeles in the 1970s. She and her husband, who just so happens to be a white man, are moving in together, and well, they're moving into a new apartment. They're not moving in together. They're moving into a new apartment, and she is suddenly taken out of her timeline and dropped into, I think it was Maryland in the 1800s. on a plantation, and there's a kid drowning. His name is Rufus, and there's something more about him that I'm not going to tell you, but Rufus is rescued by Dana, and then she's projected back into the 70s, back to her old life, and she's just meandering around, and she's taken back there again. And each time she goes back, she's there for a much longer period. And it seems like the only thing to get her back is to experience trauma or violence, or the threat of violence. And unfortunately, that's not entirely true. So that was the one thing that really got to me. Not so much that I couldn't suspend my belief in that she was being taken back in time during antebellum era, but that I couldn't quite figure out what it is that would trigger her to go back home to her original timeline, and then why it was happening to begin with. She ends up becoming a slave to this plantation owner, and Rufus is his son, and each time she goes back, he's a little bit older, and yet her time isn't really moving that far along. She's only experiencing like hours in between. This is a book that I hope more people pick up in the near future, because this is a sci-fi novel it's light on sci, so it's a very approachable book. It's easy to read through, and it's really gripping. It's also quite terrifying, because even though you kind of get the sense that you know what's going to happen in the end, even though you know the ending like from the beginning technically, but you don't really, you want to know how she gets there. And it's a wild ride. It's also quite terrifying, and it left me in a state of, oh my god, what the fuck is gonna happen next? It's a 4.5, almost a 5-star for me. I'm probably gonna bump it up to a 5-star. This is the most exciting book that I read this month, and then but of my favorites, this one is number 1. I don't have a copy of How We Disappeared, but it would be like it would probably be between I'm gonna put it up here. But anyway, this was the month. They also had 2 Margaret Atwood books on the list, and I had actually read those years ago, so I don't really recall them so well. So I was hoping that I'd be able to get to read them at some point, but it didn't happen, and I don't really have a lot of enthusiasm to reread them now. One of them was a short story collection called was it Good Bones and Simple Murders, or something like that. I'll put it here. And that is, I remember I did flip through the book, and I do recall it was more like a collection of notions and essays, and I do recall loving it. I think I gave it 5 stars way back when I reviewed books, like not leaving good reviews, like just leaving star ratings. And then the other book was Surfacing, which I'm gonna be perfectly honest, I gave it 3 stars back in whenever that was, and I don't think I left much of a review on that book either, but I do think of that book pretty often. I remember it being more of like a mystery thriller, and it was, I identified with, it felt timeless, and I identified with some of the scenery. It takes place in Montreal, from like on a lake house, I believe, and it's about friends that are going on a vacation, I believe, and it felt so much like people just trying to get away and have a relaxing weekend, but some shit's going down, and our protagonist is having a meltdown, and something about her father. I'm trying to unearth that book from my mind, but I don't remember it entirely, and I know that if I were to read it today, I would have read it up more. I wouldn't have just given it 3 stars. It's definitely one that there are elements of it that really stuck with me, so that alone just gives it more weight. But that was my month, and well, not the whole month, but that was everything that I read for the Stolen TBR project, and I hope that you enjoyed. Again, just go take a look at their reviews down below, and I will, I'm going to be doing this again. So if you have a TBR that you think that I might like, or if you want me to steal your TBR at some point, let me know. I'll come scope it out. This was just something that I did on a whim, and I definitely want to do it again. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching this. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, and also thumbs up because you made it and I made it, and we will be seeing you very shortly with more book reviews from the month of July.